In this video, I'm going to tell you about how I eat right and stay in shape so that we can best take advantage of our human hardware before we all inevitably get replaced by robots. If you're a lonely software nerd, like I was in middle school, you might even be able to convince girls to like you. I'm not a health nut or a fitness influencer. This is from the perspective of somebody who spends 8 hours a day in front of a computer and rarely has enough time to cook dinner. My main rule is keep it simple. If I'm planning to go for a hike, but I don't know which trail to take, I'm probably gonna sit at home and watch Netflix. If I buy 10 ingredients to make the perfect burrito, when it gets to dinner time, that's right, I'm just gonna order it from Chipotle. And while I do eat out a few times a week, I also try to cook for myself, and I try to make meals that are healthy and simple. In particular, I try to find meals that are easy to cook, decently healthy, don't use a lot of dishes, and have ingredients that keep forever. I also try to eat the same thing as much as possible, just so there's even less to think about. For breakfast every morning, I eat 2 frozen waffles, a cup of coffee with milk, and if I'm feeling adventurous, 2 eggs and some greens, although I'm usually too lazy to do that anyway. What's nice about this meal is everything lasts forever and is easy to prepare. 2 waffles, store them in the freezer, put them directly in the toaster oven, and you're ready to go. You don't even need to use any utensils. They're also surprisingly healthy as long as you don't put maple syrup or sugar. You know, they're not health food, but they're mostly just grains and eggs. Coffee is also super easy. You can make it from instant if you don't like brewing it, and I usually have milk lying around anyway, so it's something that's easy for me to add. Eggs are the most complicated thing on this list, mostly because you have to cook them in a pan, which is probably why I never do it. But if I'm feeling really energetic, I'll have some eggs and some lettuce as well. For the other meals, I pull from my DGen list of easy food. Peanut butter and jelly. Store the peanut butter and the jelly forever. It's super easy to make and it's mostly a complete meal. Bread and cheese, it's literally just bread and cheese. Cut them up and eat them together. Chicken and broccoli, you can store them in the freezer and then just put them directly into the oven. You don't even have to do anything to them, just literally take them out of the freezer and put them in the oven. If you want, you can season it afterwards so you can get different flavors for different meals. Hummus, just dip stuff in it. You literally need to do no cooking. It also stores pretty well and is a pretty good source of protein. Pasta and tomato sauce, a classic. You need to be a little bit careful that your tomato sauce doesn't have any bullshit in it, but it stores in a pantry and is a pretty good meal. An apple, it's literally just an apple. You just pick it up and eat it. Don't need to do anything except maybe wash it first. If you're unsure what to get, Fuji apples are generally well balanced and pretty tasty. When you're cooking like the laziest person alive, always be on the lookout for foods that you can just pick up and eat, like milk, blueberries, trail mix, and string cheese. These foods aren't even any less healthy, even though making them takes way less effort. If I buy food that's going to go bad or plan on complicated meals, it just isn't going to happen. You might be looking at this list and thinking, hey, pasta and tomato sauce isn't really that healthy. Shouldn't you be having a kale salad instead? I tend to find, at least for myself, that if I plan too hard to eat foods that aren't fulfilling and are extremely time-consuming or thought-provoking to make, I won't make anything at all, and I'll wind up snacking on the foods that are really bad. If you're alive and you have a pulse, you probably know what these are, but generally it's anything that's super fatty or has an obscene amount of sugar. I also try to avoid foods that are overly processed or contain a bunch of strange chemicals. Fatty foods are generally foods that are heavily fried, or foods like macaroni that contain an obscene amount of cream or butter. Basically, if it has an obscene amount of oil, butter, or animal fat, probably isn't good for you. It may seem obvious, but it's good to be on the lookout for these specific details because there's a really big difference between foods like Cheetos and foods like goldfish. If you take a look at the ingredients list, Cheetos are heavily fried and goldfish are not. And so Cheetos are something I would consider junk food, but goldfish are generally not that bad. Just like fat, most foods in nature have a little bit of sugar. But what you really want to avoid is foods where that fat and that sugar has been heavily concentrated and then added to something else. So generally desserts and candies and anything with sugar added, as well as sugary drinks like iced teas and sodas. Generally speaking, if you added granulated sugar to it or corn syrup, it's probably bad. Now, you've probably heard the term empty calories before, but to understand why, we're going to have to sit down and do a little bit of math. When you eat food, your body needs enough energy to do stuff and enough nutrients to build the body. Most normal food that you find in nature, or that you'd imagine people eating as part of a normal meal, has about enough energy and about enough nutrients. So if you eat as many nutrients as you need, you'll get about the right amount of energy and vice versa. Let's take a look at my actual order from Chipotle. If we take a look at the nutrition facts, we can see that it has a ton of calories, but also a ton of nutrients. In fact, if we go and we look at the breakdown, we can see that it has 60% carbs, 16% fat, and 25% protein. Almost exactly the ratios that are recommended by most nutritionists. It also has most of the vitamins and minerals that you need for your day. And what's wild about this is just normal ass food. This isn't super health food or anything crazy. This is just a normal meal and it gets you something that's exactly right. Now let's see what happens when you go in and you add some empty calories. In this example, we're going to use a bottle of Coke and a packet of Sour Patch Kids. On the surface, it may not seem like a lot, only 400 calories. But let's see what happens when we go in and we try to make our diet work. Remember, in order to give our body enough nutrients, we still need to eat the same levels of carbs, fat, and protein. And we still need to get enough vitamins and minerals from the foods that we eat. If we had our soda and our candy and we still wanted to get to the same nutritional value as the burrito, we wouldn't need just any 500 calorie meal. We would need something that's 40% protein and absolutely jam-packed with vitamins and nutrients. This kind of nutrient makeup isn't something that's easy to get from just normal foods. If you have soda and sugar, then in order to make a balanced diet, that's when you have to be extremely precise and extremely careful to get exactly the right combination of foods to give you the nutrients that you need. My advice here isn't to turn your eating habits into a deep science. It's only to show that eating the really bad foods, it's what makes coming up with a good diet really hard. For most people, if you just avoid heavy amounts of oil, sugar, and cream, and you just eat normal food that came from the earth, you'll be completely fine. Another way I like to think about things is if you eat something that has the same number of calories as a full meal, you need to ask yourself, is it enough to count as dinner? You know that 2 sodas and a candy bar isn't a meal, even though it has the same number of calories. So that's how you know that you aren't supposed to be eating it. Likewise, 2 bags of Cheetos is 600 calories, but it's not dinner. And if you're unsure of whether to eat something, that's often a good rule of thumb to go by. Not perfect, but good for simple people that don't like to think too hard. But at this point you might be saying, Sammy, these are all the foods that I like. How do I stop just eating them? And this is different for different people, but for me the things that work are have a replacement in mind and make sure that replacement is there and readily available. It's not easy to just stop eating chocolate, but it is much easier to just Indiana Jones swap out chocolate with something else. This is also backed by current theory in psychological science, that basically the easiest way to curb a bad habit isn't to do nothing entirely, but to swap it out with something slightly better. That's why you see so many former smokers chewing on toothpicks. If my goal is to eat a diet of exclusively kale and broccoli, then when I go to 7-Eleven and their fresh food looks like cyborg vomit, I'm just going to get a bag of potato chips and call it a day. What I need is a way to replace the bag of potato chips so that if I'm in the same situation, I can get something that's fulfilling in the same way as a bag of potato chips, but isn't covered in oil. When I'm at a gas station and faced with this choice, I usually swap it out for trail mix. It still has a few M&Ms and a little bit of sugar, but considering the options, it's a good replacement, and it helps me shift towards something that's a little bit better. What's important is that the replacement is readily accessible in the same situations and the same locations as the food that you're trying to replace. Instead of Sprite, I have water or unsweetened iced tea, sometimes even milk actually. And these still give you the hydration and maybe a little bit of flavor, but without drinking liquid corn syrup. It's important here to also avoid beverages like sweetened iced tea and apple juice, because even though they sound different, they're still basically just sugar water. If you're buying processed or manufactured foods, you have to be extra careful that somebody didn't stick copious amounts of sugar in there. You want to stick to water, unsweetened tea, milk, or smoothies with pulp in it. And this kind of easy replacement is where keep it simple matters. If I go to the pantry and try to find something to eat, if there's an apple right there, I'm just gonna pick it up and eat it. But if all my health food needs intense preparation and cooking, and there's a chocolate bar on the shelf, it's much harder for me to keep my hand out of the cookie jar. What I need is a replacement that I don't have to think about and that's always there, so that when I go and I reach for something to eat, I can avoid the foods that are really bad. If you take anything from this video, it should be that if you eat food that came from God's green earth, and you didn't process it and super concentrate it, it's probably fine. Your body has a natural rhythm that understands what nutrients it needs, and a little wiggle room that can handle getting a little more or a little less of every type of nutrient. What you need is a plan to eat normal-ass food that's simple, so that when you make the lazy choice, it's also the right one. There's also a ton of topics that I wanted to cover but didn't have time to. If you want to hear more about these topics, you can let me know by giving the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.